Hey there, and welcome back to After Dark Horrors. I'm here with another collection that's going to keep you awake tonight. So maybe grab some coffee, because sleep isn't happening after this one. Before we dive into today's stories, please hit that like button and subscribe if you enjoy these tales from the dark corners of our world. Also, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. I have to say up front, everything you're about to hear comes from real accounts, documented experiences, and testimonies from people who lived through these encounters in the Ozark Mountains. These aren't campfire stories or urban legends. These are the kind of experiences that change people forever. The Ozark Mountains stretch across Missouri, Arkansas, Oklahoma, and parts of Kansas, a region where ancient forests hide secrets that go back generations, where folklore and reality blur in ways that would make your skin crawl. Tonight, we're exploring 8 encounters that will make you think twice about venturing into those hills alone. So settle in, turn down the lights, and let's begin our journey into the Ozarks. Darkest Secrets. Story 1. The Missing Weekend, October 2019. A college student named Marcus Webb set out for what should have been a simple 3-day solo hiking trip through the Buffalo National River area in Arkansas. Marcus was experienced. He'd been hiking the Ozark trails since he was a kid with his grandfather. He knew these mountains, respected them, and always followed safety protocols. Marcus left his dorm at the University of Arkansas on a Friday afternoon, telling his roommate Jake he'd be back Sunday evening. He had his usual gear, a reliable tent, enough food for 4 days, water purification tablets, a GPS device, and his phone with a portable charger. Jake remembered Marcus being excited about photographing the fall colors and maybe getting some good shots for his photography class. Sunday came and went. No Marcus. Jake called Monday morning, then Tuesday. By Wednesday, he contacted Marcus's parents in Little Rock. By Thursday, they filed a missing person report with the Newton County Sheriff's Office. Search and rescue teams combed the area where Marcus had planned to hike. They found his truck parked at the Steel Creek Campground trailhead, exactly where he said it would be. His camping permit was properly displayed on the dashboard. Everything looked normal. The search continued for 5 days. Helicopters, trained dogs, volunteers, dozens of people looking for any trace of Marcus Webb. The Arkansas wilderness can swallow people. They know that, but Marcus was careful. He was smart. He should have been FINDABLE. Then, on the following Tuesday, exactly 1 week after his planned return, Marcus walked out of the forest. He appeared on Highway 74, about 12 miles from where he'd parked his truck. A state trooper found him walking along the road, dirty and confused, but physically unharmed. He was wearing the same clothes he'd left in, though they were stained with mud and something that looked like clay. His backpack was gone. His phone was dead. His GPS device was missing. But here's what made the case strange. Marcus had no memory of the past week. The medical evaluation at Baxter Regional Medical Center showed he was dehydrated and malnourished, consistent with being lost in the wilderness for several days. But there were details that didn't add up. His boots showed wear patterns, suggesting he'd walked much farther than the immediate search area. Soil samples from his clothes contained mineral deposits not found anywhere. Near his planned hiking route, there were the photographs. Marcus's camera was still with him, and when they developed the film, he used an old film camera for his art projects. They found images that no one could explain. The first dozen photos showed normal hiking scenes: trees, rock formations, creek beds, standard nature photography. But the last photos on the roll were different. They showed Marcus himself, clearly taken by someone else. In the photos, he's sitting by a campfire in what appears to be a cave or rock shelter. He looks relaxed, even happy, talking to someone off camera. But Marcus had no memory of meeting anyone, no memory of finding shelter, no memory of these photos being taken. The most unsettling photo was the last one. It showed Marcus sleeping in a makeshift bed inside what appeared to be a much larger cave system. Ancient-looking symbols were visible on the rock walls behind him, carved deep into the stone. Archaeologists who examined the photos said the symbols resembled pre-Columbian petroglyphs, but in configurations they'd never seen before. Marcus returned to college but dropped out within a month. Friends said he'd changed. He became obsessed with the Ozark Mountains, spending hours researching cave systems, underground rivers, and what he called the old settlements. He started having dreams, always the same dream. He was in a vast underground chamber, warm and lit by fires, surrounded by people he couldn't quite see clearly. They were teaching him something, showing him something important. But he could never remember what when he woke up. 6 months later, Marcus disappeared again. This time, he didn't tell anyone he was leaving. His truck was found at a different trailhead, this one near Ponca. His gear was neatly arranged on the front seat, as if he'd decided he wouldn't need it. That was 3 years ago. Marcus Webb has never been found. But here's what's really disturbing. In the past 3 years, at least 4 other hikers have reported similar experiences in the Arkansas Ozarks. Memory gaps lasting several days, photographs they don't remember taking, and an overwhelming compulsion to return to the mountains. The local sheriff's department has started keeping a file they unofficially call the missing time cases. They don't like to talk about it, but if you push them, they'll admit that something unusual is happening in those hills, something that's been happening for a very long time. Story 2. The Harmony Recordings. Sarah Chen was a graduate student in anthropology at Missouri State University. When she decided to spend the summer of 2018 documenting traditional folk music in the Missouri Ozarks, her thesis focused on how isolated mountain communities preserved musical traditions that had been lost elsewhere, and she'd received a small grant to travel through the backwoods areas with recording equipment. Sarah was methodical in her research. She'd identified several communities in Tawney and Stone counties where families had lived for generations. Without much outside influence, these were the kind of places where musical traditions might survive unchanged, passed down through families like precious heirlooms. Her equipment was professing grade: a digital recorder capable of capturing high-quality audio, directional microphones, and backup systems to ensure she wouldn't lose any recordings. She also carried a laptop for immediate backup and analysis. The first few weeks went well. Sarah documented fiddle tunes that predated the Civil War, learned ballads that traced back to Ireland and Scotland, and recorded elderly residents sharing stories about their ancestors. It was exactly the kind of field work she'd hoped for. Then she heard about the Hartwell family. The Hartwells lived in a hollow deep in the Mark Twain National Forest, accessible only by a logging road that hadn't been maintained in decades. Local people spoke of them in whispers, describing them as different but not unkind. They were said to preserve musical traditions older than anything else in the region, songs that went back to the very first settlers. Sarah was intrigued. This was exactly what her research needed: family that had maintained their musical heritage in complete isolation. She found the Hartwell place on a sweltering Tuesday in July. Hollow was deeper and more isolated than she'd expected, surrounded by ridges so steep and heavily forested that the sun barely reached the valley floor. The house itself was old, but well maintained, with a large covered porch where several family members sat in the afternoon heat. The Hartwells welcomed her with surprising warmth. There were about 15 family members living in the hollow, 3 generations, sharing the old homestead. The patriarch, Samuel Hartwell, was in his 80s, but moved with the easy grace of someone much younger. His daughter Martha served as the family's unofficial spokesperson, while various grandchildren and great-grandchildren watched Sarah with curious but friendly eyes. They were delighted to learn about her research and eagerly agreed to share their music. That evening, after a dinner of fresh vegetables and what they called mountain trout, the family gathered on the porch for what they described as their daily music time. Sarah set up her recording equipment as the sun disappeared behind the ridges. Oil lamps were lit, casting dancing shadows across the porch. The family arranged themselves in a rough circle, some holding instruments, fiddles, banjos, a dulcimer, others simply waiting to add their voices. Samuel raised his hand, and they began to sing. Sarah had heard hundreds of traditional songs during her research, but what came from the Hartwell family was unlike anything in her experience. The harmonies were complex, weaving in and out of each other in patterns that seemed to follow mathematical principles she couldn't identify. The melodies felt ancient, as if they carried the weight of centuries. But it was more than just the music. As the family sang, Sarah found herself experiencing a profound sense of peace, as if the stress and anxiety of modern life were simply dissolving away. The recording equipment seemed unimportant. Her research seemed unimportant. There was only the music, flowing through the mountain air like a living thing. The singing continued long into the night. Sarah lost track of time, lost track of everything except the beautiful, hypnotic harmonies filling the hollow. She felt herself swaying with the rhythm, her eyes growing heavy, her thoughts becoming distant and dreamlike. She woke up the next morning in her car, parked beside the county road about 5 miles from the Hartwell Hollow. Her recording equipment was neatly packed in the back seat. Her laptop was open, with a note saved on the desktop. "Thank you for visiting. Safe travels." The Hartwell family. Sarah drove back to the hollow immediately, but she couldn't find it. The logging road she'd followed was still there, but it led to a different valley, entirely one that showed no signs of recent habitation. She spent hours searching, consulting GPS coordinates, even hiring a local guide. But the Hartwell homestead had simply vanished. Frustrated, but not ready to give up, Sarah returned to her recordings. She had 8 hours of audio from that evening, and she was eager to analyze. What she'd captured, what she found changed her life. The recordings were unlike anything she'd ever heard. The Hartwell family's voices had been captured perfectly, but underneath their singing was something else, a low, rhythmic humming that seemed to emanate from the earth itself. Acoustic analysis showed frequencies that shouldn't have been possible for human voices to produce. Harmonies that created mathematical patterns found nowhere else in musical literature. But the most disturbing discovery came when Sarah ran the recordings through spectral analysis software. Hidden within the audio, too low for human ears to consciously detect, was something that looked like a message. When converted to visual form, the frequencies created patterns that resembled symbols, the same type of ancient petroglyphs that had been found in caves throughout the Ozark Mountains. Sarah became obsessed with the recordings. She played them constantly, analyzing every frequency, every harmonic overtone, every mathematical relationship she could identify. She stopped attending classes, stopped eating regularly, stopped sleeping normal hours. Her advisor became concerned when Sarah started talking about the deep music and the songs that call the mountain. She insisted that the Hartwell family had shown her musical traditions that predated European settlement, that connected to something much older and more fundamental than conventional folk songs. 3 months after her encounter in the hollow, Sarah disappeared from her apartment in Springfield. She left behind her laptop, her research notes, and her recording equipment. The only thing missing was a small backpack and her hiking boots. A note on her desk simply read, "Gone to find the source. The music is calling me home." Park rangers found Sarah's car at a trailhead in the Mark Twain National Forest. Her backpack was discovered 6 months later, empty except for a small digital recorder. When they played the recorder, it contained 8 hours of what sounded like Sarah's voice, singing in harmonies that matched the Hartwell recordings perfectly. But Sarah was singing alone, or at least, she appeared to be alone. Spectral analysis revealed those same impossible frequencies, the same mathematical patterns hidden in the audio. Whatever Sarah had found in those mountains, she had learned to make their music herself. Sarah Chen has been missing for 4 years now, but every few months, hikers in the Missouri Ozarks report hearing beautiful singing echoing through the valleys at dusk. The voices seem to come from everywhere and nowhere, harmonizing in patterns that make listeners feel an overwhelming urge to follow the sound. Deeper into the mountains, local authorities have stopped investigating these reports. They classify them as acoustic anomalies and advise hikers to move away from the area if they hear unexplained singing in the forest. But they keep a file on Sarah Chen, and every few months, that file gets a little thicker. Story 3. The Watcher's Tom Morrison had been a truck driver for 20 years when he took the contract route through the Arkansas Ozarks in 2020. It was decent money for hauling lumber from sawmills in the mountains to distribution centers in Little Rock. The route took him along some lonely highways, through remote forest areas, but Tom didn't mind solitude. After decades of interstate driving, the quiet mountain roads were a welcome change. The route was simple: pick up loads in tiny mill towns scattered through Newton and Pope counties. then head south on Highway 7 through the Ozark National Forest. It was beautiful country, especially in early fall when the leaves were changing, and Tom found himself looking forward to the drives through what locals called the deep forest. Tom was a practical man, not given to flights of imagination. 23 years of long-haul trucking had taught him to stay alert, trust his instincts, and not let his mind wander into territory that might make him jumpy on dark roads. But after 6 weeks on the Ozark route, he started noticing things that didn't fit his practical worldview. It began with lights in the forest. At first, Tom assumed they were campfires or maybe hunting cabins with generator power. The Ozark National Forest allowed camping, and it was hunting season. Lights in the woods weren't unusual, but these lights were different. They appeared at the same locations every night, always visible from the same curves in the highway, and they never flickered or varied in intensity like campfires should. More puzzling was their arrangement. The lights formed perfect geometric pattern triangles, diamonds, sometimes complex designs that looked almost like constellations. They appeared about an hour after sunset and vanished before sunrise, visible only during Tom's late evening runs when he was hauling loads south. Tom mentioned the lights to other drivers at the truck stop in Russellville, but nobody else ran his exact route. The dispatcher said they'd had several drivers on the Ozark contract over the years, but Tom was the first to mention unusual lights. After a month of seeing the same patterns night after night, Tom decided to investigate. He parked his rig at a wide spot in the highway where one particular triangle of lights was clearly visible about half a mile into the forest. He grabbed his heavy-duty flashlight and headed into the woods. The forest was denser than it looked from the road. Tom had to push through underbrush and navigate around fallen trees, but he kept the lights in sight as reference points. As he got closer, he could see they weren't campfires at all. They appeared to be some kind of electrical illumination, bright and steady, but he couldn't make out the source. That's when he realized he wasn't alone in the forest. Tom became aware of movement in his peripheral vision, shadowy figures that seemed to pace him as he walked toward the lights. When he turned his flashlight in their direction, he caught glimpses of people at least. They looked like people standing motionless between the trees. They were too far away to see clearly, but they seemed to be watching him. Tom called out, asking if anyone needed help, but received no response. The figures remained perfectly still until he turned away, then resumed their subtle movement through the woods. It was like being surrounded by a patrol that wanted to observe, but not engage. The smart thing would have been to head back to his truck. Tom knew that, but curiosity and maybe a little stubbornness kept him moving toward the lights. He'd come this far, and he wanted to know what he was looking at as he pushed deeper into the forest. The watchers became more numerous. Tom counted at least a dozen figures positioned around him in a loose circle, always maintaining the same distance, always staying just at the edge of his flashlight beam. They moved with him like an escort, neither threatening nor welcoming, simply present. The lights turned out to be coming from what looked like camping. Lanterns hung from tree branches about 10 feet off the ground. But these weren't ordinary lanterns. They cast a clean white light with no visible power source, and they were arranged in the precise geometric pattern Tom had observed from the highway. Under the lights, someone had created a clearing. The ground had been swept clean of leaves and debris, revealing smooth earth that looked almost polished. In the center of the clearing stood a single object that made Tom's blood run cold. A wooden post about 6 feet tall with fresh scratches carved into its surface. The scratches looked like tally marks. Tom played his flashlight over the post, counting the marks. There were dozens of them, arranged in groups of 5, like someone keeping track of ... something. At the base of the post, the earth was disturbed, as if people had been walking in circles around it. The watchers had drawn closer, while Tom examined the post. His flashlight revealed them more clearly. Now people dressed in dark clothing that seemed to absorb light. Their faces were hidden by hoods or shadows, but Tom could feel their attention like a physical weight. One of them stepped forward, close enough for Tom to see that it was an elderly woman. She raised her hand in what might have been a greeting or a warning, then pointed back in the direction of the highway. Her message was clear. Time to go. Tom didn't argue. He backed away from the clearing, keeping his flashlight moving to track the positions of the watchers. They allowed him to retreat, but followed at the same distance, ensuring he left the area. Only when Tom reached the edge of the forest did they fade back into the trees. Tom sat in his truck for a long time that night, trying to process what he'd experienced. The logical explanation was that he'd stumbled on some kind of community, gathering maybe a religious group or survivalists who preferred their privacy. The mountains were full of people who lived off the grid and didn't welcome strangers. But the tally marks bothered him. What were they counting? Tom continued running the Ozark route, but now he paid closer attention to missing person reports and local news. What he found made him wish he'd minded his own business. Over the past 15 years, at least 30 hikers, campers, and hunters had gone missing in the section of Ozark National Forest where Tom had found the clearing. Most were eventually found or turned up safe, but several remained unaccounted for. The missing included experienced outdoorsmen who knew the area well, people who shouldn't have gotten lost or had accidents. Tom started noticing a pattern. The geometric light formations appeared most frequently during periods when someone had recently gone missing in the forest. The more complex the pattern, the more recent the disappearance seemed to be. One evening in November, Tom saw the most elaborate light display yet, a star-shaped configuration with over a dozen individual lights visible from the highway. When he checked the local news the next day, he learned that a father and son from Kansas had failed to return from a hunting trip in the same area. Tom knew he should report what he'd seen to authorities, but what could he tell them? That mysterious lights in the forest correlated with missing person. That a group of people were apparently keeping count of something in a hidden clearing. He had no evidence, no proof. Just an increasingly sick feeling that he was witnessing. Something terrible. The decision was made. For him, in December, Tom was driving his last run before Christmas break when he saw something that changed everything. His headlights caught movement on the highway ahead. People walking along the shoulder in the same dark clothing he'd encountered in the forest. There were 6 or 7 of them, moving in single file toward his truck. As Tom got closer, they turned to face his headlights. For a moment, they stood motionless in the glare, and Tom got his first clear look at their faces. They weren't faces at all. They were masked, smooth, featureless ovals that reflected his headlights like mirrors. The masks showed no expression, no eye holes, nothing that suggested the humanity of whoever wore them. Tom hit the brakes and reached for his CB radio to call for help, but when he looked up, the highway was empty. The watchers had vanished as suddenly as they'd appeared. Tom quit the Ozark route the next day. He told his dispatcher he was taking a different contract, something that kept him on interstate highways where there were truck stops and other drivers and normal explanations for everything he saw. But he still follows the news from the Arkansas Ozarks, still tracks the reports of missing persons in the national forest. The numbers keep going up. The disappearances keep happening. And sometimes, late at night, when he's driving through other dark places, Tom wonders if the watchers are still out there, still counting, still maintaining their patient vigil in the deep woods. He's never told anyone the full story of what he saw in the forest. Who would believe him? But sometimes Tom thinks about that tally post, about all those marks carved into the wood, and he wonders what happens when they reach whatever number they're counting toward. He doesn't want to know the answer. Story 4. The Lost Settlement. My name is Elise Turner, and I stumbled onto the Ozark Mountains' most unsettling secret while tracing my family tree. It was the summer of 2021, and I'd learned that my great-great-grandfather, Samuel Turner, disappeared without a trace in 1892. All I had were fragments of family lore references to an old settlement deep in the mountains, letters hinting at dark reasons he never returned, and a single yellowed photograph of a group of settlers, standing before a log cabin none of us had ever found up. So I packed light GPS, camera, notebook, canned, set out to find that cabin. My research pointed me to a remote hollow along the White River, upstream from the tiny town of Calico Rock, Arkansas. The locals I asked only shrugged and warned me to stick to marked trails. Old Turner's place burned down decades ago, one store clerk told me. Ain't nothing but ash and ghosts now. That only made me more determined. I hiked in at dawn, following a faint game trail past towering sycamores and bluff overhangs. By midday, I reached a collapsed chimney rising from a forest floor covered in thick leaf mold. Half-buried timbers lay nearby. This had to be it. I cleared debris until I uncovered worn wooden planks, floorboards that hadn't seen sunlight in over a century. My heart raced as I set up my camera. I knelt, brushing away mold to reveal carved initials. Saint 1889. Beneath them, someone had carved a crude cross inside a heart. That night, I camped beside the ruins. The forest grew strange after dark. Cicadas went silent. Owls called only once. Then the wind brought whispers. I thought I heard distant footsteps, low murmurs mixing with the creak of trees. I chalked it up to nerves and exhaustion until I checked my camera at dawn. The footage showed me clearing debris around the chimney, but also someone else, a tall figure in a faded coat, standing just out of focus behind me. I spun around. Nothing. Just woods. I pressed the footage frame before. The figure's face was obscured by shadow, but its stance felt familiar like the man in my family photograph. My great-grandfather. Over the next 2 days, I explored nearby hollows and found more carving, initials hidden in trees, stacked stones arranged like gravestones, and, most chilling, a rough-hewn plank bearing a single word, stay. On my last afternoon, I decided to leave. As I packed, the whispers returned. This time clearer. Stay. Family. Ours. I froze, listening. Then a soft footstep came from my camp's edge. I snapped my head around. No one there. I grabbed my gear and fled down the trail, adrenaline pushing me faster than I'd ever run in the woods. Branches whipped my arms. Roots tripped me. But I didn't look back until I burst onto a logging road an hour later. Back home, I examined my footage and notes. The clearing whispers weren't wind. They were voices men speaking a language I didn't recognize, murmuring about homecoming and blood, ties. Samuel Turner's disappearance suddenly made sense. He'd never left because he didn't want to or couldn't. I reached out to local historians and found a journal entry from 1892 in the Baxter County Archives. It described a massacre settlers ambushed by unknown assailants. Their bodies never recovered. The journal named only one survivor, Samuel Turner. No one believed the massacre account. Historians chalked it up to tall tales. But I now know the truth. An old settlement still exists, hidden in the Ozarks, protected by blood oath and ancient promise. And every few years, when a Turner heir arrives, the forest claims them as its own. I haven't returned, but if you ever camp near those ruins and hear whispers on the wind, remember some homes never let you go. Story 5. Shadows on the Water in June 2022. Friends Marcus Reed and Elena Torres rented kayaks to paddle the upper White River through the Ozarks. Early summer floods had swollen the river perfect for a swift, scenic ride. They launched before dawn, eager to catch sunrise over the bluffs. By mid-morning, they reached a narrow canyon where mist clung to the water's surface. Elena steered close to the moss-covered bank to photograph blooming rhododendrons. Marcus paddled ahead, scanning the towering limestone walls. Suddenly, Elena's voice crackled over the radio. "Marcus, did you see that?" He glanced back. A dark figure stood on the riverbank, half hidden by laurel bushes. No fishing gear, no boat, just a man staring at them. Marcus slowed his kayak. "Hello?" he called. The figure didn't move. Instinct told Marcus to paddle closer, but instinct said, "Run faster." Seconds later, more figures emerged, 3 others, spaced like sentries. Each stared without expression. The friends paddled on, hearts pounding. For the next hour, they saw figures at every bend, watchers on the cliffs, gazing down. No fishing rods, no signs of camps, just silent silhouettes observing the current. When they reached a wide bend, Marcus saw an old ferry landing, a weathered dock with rusted cables crossing the river. The dock looked abandoned, yet footprints in the soft mud suggested recent use. Elena's radio crackled. Someone's there. Behind the trees, they glided past, careful not to disturb whatever lingered. At the downstream end, the river widened into rapids class 2 to 3. Marcus gripped his paddle tight, scanning the banks. A figure stepped onto a boulder midstream, arms raised, as if conducting the water itself. Then it vanished. They cleared the rapids and reached a ranger station at noon, shaken, silent. No one believed them until the ranger checked the riverbank. Dozens of fresh footprints, all adult sizes, leading to the old dockhand. No footprints, leaving it. Marcus and Alina never kayaked that stretch again. Locals say the water watchers are spirits of an old ferry company lost to flood, forever replaying their route and marking passengers among the living, whether myth or flesh. Those watchers claim anyone who drifts into their valley. Story 6. The Church in the Hills in spring 2023. A small evangelical church opened on a remote ridge near Mountain View, Arkansas. Reverend Cole Martin built it after inheriting a family homestead. He advertised heartfelt worship in God's creation and hosted weekly outdoor services. Julia Price visited one Sunday in May. She had driven 2 hours to escape city life, longing for nature and spirituality. She arrived at midday to find the church, a simple wooden structure perched at the edge of a bluff, overlooking rolling hills. 20 people gathered under a white canopy around rough-hewn benches. Reverend Martin led hymns, accompanied by acoustic guitar. The service concluded with an invitation to hike a short trail behind the church to commune with God's glory. Julia joined the group. They hiked in single file along a narrow path through young pines. After 10 minutes, Reverend Martin stopped at a clearing ringed by stones, an old ritual site, he explained, used by settlers during the frontier era. He asked everyone to hold hands in a circle and pray for renewal, then invited attendees to speak private confessions aloud. One by one, people whispered personal struggles, addiction, loss, grief into the circle. When Julia's turn came, she hesitated, then softly shared her loneliness since her fiancé's death. Reverend Martin stepped forward, bowed his head, and began praying in deep tones. The attendees echoed, their voices rising in unison. Julia felt warmth, comfort, but also unease. The circle tightened. She glanced around, faces serene, eyes closed, hands clasped so tightly, fingers whitened. Reverend Martin raised his voice. Now, receive God's new covenant. He broke the circle abruptly. The congregation pressed in close, each placing a hand on Julia's shoulder. She felt breath on her neck, hushed murmurs in her ear. Then one of the congregants stepped behind her, producing a silver chalice. Wine, he said, to seal the covenant. Julia recoiled, confused. Wine. She'd not consented to anything beyond prayer. Before she could react, the chalice touched her lips. She tasted sweet metal. The world tilted. Heads of worshippers loomed. Hands guided her down into a small depression beneath the claringer. Sunken pit lined with stone. A final murmur. Welcome home. Julia's vision blurred. She tried to pull away, but arms gripped firmly. Darkness enveloped her. She awakened at the hilltop, alone, at dusk. The path led back to the church, but no one was there. The benches were empty, the stones undisturbed. Reverend Martin's truck was gone. A breeze stirred the canopy, but no footprints remained in the soil. Julia fled, vowing never to return. She later learned Reverend Martin's church was never registered with any denomination. There was no record of him hosting services before or after. Neighbors recall glimpsing a gathering of people that one Sunday, but no building, just a canopy set at the bluff's edge. Julia's friends say her memory of the pit may be a hallucination spurred by grief, but she still carries the taste of metallic sweetness in her mouth, and the knowledge that some congregations meet where no one else will look. Story 7. Lanterns. After dark in November 2023, college roommates Devin Brooks and Maya Patel joined a ghost walk tour in Eureka Springs. Arkansas is an old mining town famous for its Victorian architecture and urban legends. The tour promised supernatural surprises delivered by a local historian. That night, the group followed flickering lanterns along narrow streets and shadowed stairways. Stories of haunted hotels and boarding houses left them chilled, but the group laughed nervously between stops. At the tour's end, the historian invited participants to walk a secluded path behind the historic cemetery, only open to small groups, he said, for an exclusive encounter with the unseen. Devin hesitated. Cemetery ghosts weren't his thing, but Maya urged him on. They slipped away from the main group and followed the lantern-wielding guide along a rocky trail. The lights bobbed ahead, revealing worn gravestones in neat rows. The historian recited tales of restless spirits, soldiers, widows, sons, travelers who never left. Then the lanterns went out. In darkness, the guide's voice became low. Feel the presence around you. He lit a single lantern held high. Its glow revealed dozens of lanterns hanging from tree branches, surrounding the trail in a half moon. Each lantern held a small candle, burning wind-torn but steady. Maya stepped forward as the guide whispered instructions. Choose a lantern, make a wish, leave a message. She lifted a lantern from a low branch and peered inside a scrap of paper tied to the candle's handle. She read "Find peace," penned in elegant script. Devin laughed, unnerved, but Maya's face grew serious. She unrolled the paper and added her own note. Bring back what's lost. Then she replaced it and handed the lantern to the guide. Suddenly, the forest grew still. The lanterns flickered in unison, casting long shadows. Devin heard footsteps behind him. Turning, he saw silhouettes moving between the trees, faceless, slow. Panic seized him. Let's go, he shouted, grabbing Maya's arm. The historian urged them on. Follow the lanterns back. They'll guide you. They ran as lanterns swung on branches, illuminating the path. Behind them, footsteps quickened. Only when they reached the cemetery gate did they glance back. No guide, no shadows, only silent lanterns, swaying like watchful eyes. The next day, Devin and Maya learned the tour company had closed years earlier. The guide's name didn't exist, and the cemetery's stock of hanging lanterns, never authorized, never supplied, to this day. Tourists report lanterns glowing in the same trees only at night, when no tour runs. Some say if you stop and listen, you hear whispered wishes, carried on the wind. Story 8. Echoes in the mine. The Ozarks once hosted dozens of lead and zinc mines. By 1970, most were abandoned. In March 2024, adventure YouTuber Luis L.J. Hernandez explored the Longdale mine near Pitcher, Oklahoma. Long deserted, parts flooded. Notorious for tragic collapses, LJ invited two friends, urban explorer Kira Lee and drone pilot Sam Kim, to film his documentary series. They reached the mine entrance at dusk, the air thick with mist. Graffiti covered corrugated steel doors. Warning, do not enter. Ignoring caution, they pried the door open and entered. Lee J's headlamp revealed rails leading into darkness, puddles where old carts had rusted away. Their phones pinged weakly, no signal. They set up a drone to scan the tunnel ahead from above, then descended on foot, recording the echo of dripping water and distant clanks of shifting rock. Half a mile in, they reached a collapsed shaft. The drone's camera captured movement in a side tunnel, a figure standing still, watching them. They advanced, heartbeats echoing. The figure vanished. Kira found a rusted mining lantern lit by a bluish flaming possible without fuel. She gasped. Flame was said never to burn in flooded shafts. The lantern bore an inscription, 1873. As they debated turning back, the tunnel behind them shuddered. Dust fell. Water rippled from deeper in. Then came faint voices, muffled singing in a language none recognized. With growing dread, LJ called, let's get out, but the tunnel seemed to stretch longer with every step. The singing rose, surrounded them, echoing from all sides. Sam's drone whirred and flashed. On its screen, dozens of shadowy miners lined the rails. Pickaxes, raised faces, sunken, eyes hollow. The team sprinted back, breath ragged, until the shaft's collapse led them to a narrow shaft climb. They scrambled up, lantern in hand. They emerged at dawn, crawling from the mine's rusty maw. Behind them, a chorus of singing faded into the darkness. LJ never released the footage. He posted only a short warning. Some doors shouldn't be opened. The mine holds more than rock. His channel went dark. Kira and Sam erased their recordings. Still, locals swear you hear echoes of that old miner's hymn drifting from the Longdale shaft on cold spring nights. Voices singing a work chant that ended abruptly 150 years ago, as if those miners never stopped digging. Asterisk, asterisk. A huge thank you to everyone who stayed with me until the very end. Your presence makes this journey into the unknown feel a little less lonely. and I'm really grateful you chose to spend your evening here. I hope these stories gave you exactly what you were looking for. The perfect mix of fear and fascination. There's something special about how we can all come together in the darkness, united by our love for a good scare. I truly hope tonight's tales hit you just as hard as they did me. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like it and subscribe to the channel for more creepy content. Your support helps me keep bringing these stories to life, and I'd love for you to be back tomorrow night when I share more mysteries and chills. Until then, sleep tight, dream sweetly, and don't let tonight's stories creep into your dreams. But if they do, just remember they're only stories. Sweet dreams, my friend. See you tomorrow night.